So today I thought I would take a little time and answer some of the most common questions I'm getting about dahlias coming into the inbox. So every year, inevitably, when I share about our planting of our dahlia fields, I get so many questions, and we always try to incorporate as many as we can into the video. But a lot of the things that folks are asking aren't actually things that we're doing here on the farm, and so it gets kind of tricky. So today I thought I printed everything off. I thought I would go through the most common ones and see if I can't answer one a year. So one of the big overwhelming questions is, where do folks get resources for how to grow dahlias? Well, you guys are in luck. So a few years ago, Chris, Jill, and I made this book called Discovering Dahlias. And this is everything somebody needs to know to get off to a good start with dahlias. And it is filled with the most incredible pictures that Chris took of the farm. So we go through the whole section, understanding dahlias. So you've got, here's my story, like how I met them and fell in love with them, and then the basics of understanding them. So, you know, there's a lot of different terminology when it comes to dahlias. So there's the different sizes, there are the different forms. So we do a deep dive into all of that. We go into the different colors that are available, and then really get into growing and care. So if you've never grown dahlias before, this is going to be really get you off to a great start. So it's about placement, about soil spacing. You can see how we prepare our soil. We go into all of that, pinching, staking, really how we grow them both outside and then indoors, how we deal with pests and disease, harvesting tips and tricks to get the longest vase life. You can see that. And then we get into digging and dividing and storing, the anatomy of a tuber, how you know if something's going to be good and last, and then how we store them. I'll try to go a little bit faster, but I mean, this has everything. How to take cuttings, if you've ever wondered how to propagate dahlias, how to start them from seed. And then there's a whole section on hybridizing. So if you're interested in breeding, I show you the whole process. It's really easy, actually, and very fun. It can be a great new hobby. So there are a bunch of the varieties that I bred. How to harvest your own seed. Then we get into designing with dahlias, how to use them in different arrangements, and then all of the varieties used are labeled. And then we get into the variety profile, where there are almost 400 varieties that we've organized by color featured in the book. And these are all grown on the farm and all tested, and we put them through the paces. So if you want a dahlia resource, here you go. This has everything that I know about dahlias squeezed into the pages of this book. So hopefully that'll be really, really helpful. There are lots of questions about where to source tubers, both domestically and internationally. So you can just Google Floret favorite dahlia sources, or you can go onto our website and just search favorite dahlia sources. And we have a whole list of all the places that I've ordered from over the years that pass my test, that have really quality product. They're great businesses. They, you know, like I've worked with them for many, many years. And then we also asked readers of the blog to submit that are outside of the country, because I don't have any experience with dahlia producers in Australia. So readers submitted their favorite sources. So you can find all of the ones in the US, then we've got Canada, Australia, England, all over the world. So there's a ton of awesome options. So those are my favorite sources, and we update that regularly. So if I find a new one, I add to it. So that just keeps getting better and better. So how to grow them, where to get them, we've got that covered. Okay, so next questions are, can you grow dahlias in pots, or are raised beds better than in the ground? So the reason someone would normally grow in raised beds is because the soil that they're working with isn't very good, or they don't have good drainage. And so they're trying to get the plants up out of that kind of wet, boggy ground. And so they'll raise the bed. I mean, that's not always the case, but that's often the case. And so for us, we grow in ground just because we have good soil, we work on our soil, we aren't dealing with issues like that. But lots of people use raised beds and successfully grow dahlias very well. And they can be planted in pots and containers, but I would say anytime you're growing something in a pot, the bigger that you can make the container. So say you have the choice of a 2-gallon pot or a whiskey barrel. I would definitely go whiskey barrel, because you have more soil. You can amend the soil, add compost and fertilizer a lot more easily, and it's not going to dry out as fast. And so when you're planting in containers, just make sure you go for as big of pots as you possibly can. That would be my trick with those. Okay, so lots of questions about seed. So dahlia from seed, and what is the difference between a tuber and seeds, and why would you grow them from seed? Okay, so The way that it works is dahlias, the way that most of us started outgrowing them and know them are when we get tubers or we get a clump of tubers. And if we plant that tuber in the ground, at the end of the season, that one tuber is going to turn into an entire clump of them. And sometimes we're going to get 10, 12, 15 tubers out of that. So they multiply amazingly well. And all of the tubers that form off of that come in that clump are going to be an exact clone of that mother tuber that we planted. So a tuber, when divided or multiplied, is going to be a clone. Now, seeds are completely different. So if I plant that same tuber in the ground, I let it bloom, the bees pollinate it, I let it form a seed pod, and then I collect that seed and I plant the seed, that's what these are. Every single one of those seeds in a pod is going to make an entirely new plant, and that is how new varieties are born. So you can see all of these little green babies here. These are all dahlia seedlings, and every single one of them, even though they were collected off similar flowers or even the same flower, they're going to be totally different plants. And so that's the fun of it. That's hybridizing or breeding. And so there's a whole section about that in the book. But let me show you this. So these guys were planted about 5 weeks ago. And they're very easy to grow. They start really well. You kind of start them about the same time you would do your zinnias or your cosmos. They're pretty fast to grow. So we normally start them about 8 weeks before we plant outside. They are very frost sensitive, so you've got to wait till it's nice and warm. There's all danger of frost has passed before you plant them outside. But you can see we just grow them in the 72 cell trays. These are collected from a breeding variety that we call cute as a button. But all of these trays are going to be, they're collected from different varieties, either known varieties or are breeding. And all of these guys are going to go out into the field, and that's how I'm going to be searching for new varieties as part of our breeding work. So, okay, let me take you and show you a few more things around the farm that are part of the questions. Okay, so lots of questions about getting a jump start on the season and if you can pot your dahlias up early or how do you wake them up. So one of the things you can do, especially if you live in a climate where spring comes late or you just have a very abrupt start where it's really, really cold and then boom, like almost summer is here, you can actually pot your dahlias up and you can see you can start to coax them into growing long before it's warm enough outside. So you can see I potted up all these cafe au laits because for us, cafe is one of the ones that's a little slower to get going and I want earlier flowers. And so I've potted them up, but these are 1 gallon square pots, but you can use round ones. You can really use anything that you've got. But these guys, I like to pot them up about 6 weeks before our last frost. And so once I plant them out, I'm gonna have nice big fat sprouts going out into the garden and I'm gonna get flowers about 6 weeks before the ones I just plant in the ground. So if you're growing them in pots, but you don't have a greenhouse trying to get a jump start, you got to make sure to give them some kind of supplemental light. So if you have fluorescent lighting, like those old ballasts that, like are in the garage, or you can get like a set of ones that are just the cheapy LED ones from the hardware store, just something that you can suspend over these pots to put light down, because otherwise those little baby sprouts are going to get long and skinny and they're going to be stretching for the light and they're going to get weak and fall over. So if you don't have a greenhouse, just make sure that you've got extra lighting to be able to do that. Okay, so let's go look at labels. So the next thing that folks are asking about is labeling. So we have tried every kind of label under the sun that you can possibly imagine and have settled on these. So these are a plastic 12-inch field stake made by a company called McCore, and you can order them online. They're pretty affordable. You can buy them by the case, or I think bundles of either 100 or 1,000. I think it would be 100. And then we write on them with a big thick Sharpie. And this will last and not fade for the whole growing season. And then we usually touch it up the next spring. We've had a lot of these in use for more than 5 years and they are still growing strong with they're not breaking, they're not getting brittle. We found that if you want to take off the Sharpie, you can use a magic eraser and that will get it off. I love these stakes. They work really, really well. We do use wood ones for our annuals, things that we don't want to save, but they end up just rotting. And so if you want something that's reusable over time, it is plastic, but they are very durable and they don't just like break. So that's the base. So we put a label in before we start a new variety. And then for up above, we use what are called the rose style label from a company called Paw Paw Everlast. And they're American made. They are a wonderful company, great customer service, and then we write on them using the grease pencils that they sell on their site, and then have recently started shellacking, but we can get at least 2 years out of one of these, and then we usually touch it up. The way that we suspend these is we get this, it's called EMT conduit. It comes in 10-foot lengths at the hardware store. Sometimes they sell it in shorter lengths, but we take the 10-foot piece, cut it in half, pound them into the ground at even heights, and then slip the label in. And so when you are harvesting, you've got the flowers blooming, and this is at the beginning of every new variety, and you can see it without having to get down and look below, and we find that this works really well. So we've got the double labels. So after all of the trial and error and everything we've done, this is definitely my favorite system for labeling. Lots of folks wondering how they know when it is safe to plant their tubers outside. So you definitely need to wait until you had your last spring frost before you put them out into the garden. And then if you're planting any kind of cuttings or stuff that you've potted up earlier and it's got some good green growth, I would give yourself another week to 10 days after that, just to make sure you're not going to get any super cold weather because they can't handle it. And then always people are worried about watering. So if you read the literature, a lot of times it says, don't water your tubers after you plant them. But what happens when you plant them and it rains? Everybody emails us and freaks out. Don't worry. It's very normal. I mean, they need some moisture in order to start to sprout and wake up and put down roots. I think a lot of that is just to say, like, don't overwater them. So for us, we get a lot of rain in the spring, and so we plant and then we let the rains do their thing, and then we'll put down drip irrigation and start irrigating probably sometime in June. And then the warmer and drier it gets, the more we irrigate. So we normally are running drip every, I'd say 3 days for us. Now, if you lived in a hot climate or you lived somewhere that didn't get a lot of moisture and you didn't get spring rains, you would need to start watering them shortly after planting. Otherwise, they're not going to have enough moisture to sprout and grow. Okay, and then lots of questions about how do you know if a tuber is viable? And so in Discovering Dahlias, there is a whole section on the anatomy of a tuber, what makes a good tuber, and like an up close, picture so that you can really see the details. But in a nutshell, you've got to have a body, a neck that is intact, so not broken or snapped, and then an eye, which is where the sprout or the growth comes out. And so here are two really good tubers. So I've got no cracky neck, I've got the good sprouts. So now these guys are ready to go in the ground because you can see they're really shooting out, but I've got lots of good eyes on the top. So that's how I know that they're good tubers. Okay, last two questions. I'm going to try to wrap this up. Okay. The first one is about disease. It's viruses and gall and how do we handle them. So one of the things that we are really careful about is when we're bringing in tubers from different sources. So, and I order in a lot of things, we have them grow out in a quarantine area. So we have a different patch where anything that I've ordered in this year or last year is grown in that patch, so that if there is virus coming in or issues, that it's not going to be transferred to the breeding field. So that's one of the ways we handle that. We're also, and then if we see any signs of virus or stunted plants or funky growth, then we get rid of the plants. And then we're careful I don't disinfect between harvesting flowers, but I know a lot of growers do. But when we are dividing tubers, we do disinfect. So between clumps, we're dipping our snips in bleach. 10% bleach water solution, disinfecting between those cuts. So that's how we deal with not transferring virus. And then gall. Lots of people are freaked out about gall, and if you want to really freak yourself out, just Google Dahlia gall and you're going to want to barf. There's also some really disgusting photos in Discovering Dahlias. You'll know if you've got gall in your tubers because it looks like kind of like that Romanesco broccoli or kind of like bolting cauliflower kind of growths around the eyes of the tuber, and it's freaking disgusting. So if you find that you have that when you go to divide, don't freak out, just throw it all away and then disinfect everything with bleach water and you should be good. But if you're buying like the varieties, especially, you'll find that you have a lot more crappy stuff coming into the garden. If you shop at like the hardware store, I'm not throwing Lowe's or Home Depot under the bus, but you know where you get it's like a plastic bag and it has that cardboard pretty picture on the front. The dahlias that come in those bags seem to often have funky stuff. And so when you're buying from the really, really big box stores, those are the ones to definitely quarantine before you get them around your other dahlias. Okay, and then last question is about slugs, snails, and earwigs. So we use Sluggo Plus. This is not sponsored. They often sell it in the spring at Costco, and that's the best deal. You can also get big bags of it on, Amazon or wherever. But this is safe for pets and kids, so it's not something you're going to have to worry about. But in the spring, when your dahlia shoots are nice and tender and they're coming up through the ground, slugs love to just cruise on by and mow them to the ground. Now, if they do that, they're going to grow back, so don't freak out. But it does help to put this around the base of the plant, especially when you have that tender new growth. And then we also have ducks. We have about a dozen ducks, a few more or less depending on the time of year, but they cruise the garden and they do an amazing job keeping the slugs and snails at bay. So that helps us a lot. But if you don't have if you don't have ducks, this works really well. And then for earwigs, which will chomp your blooming flowers, especially the big dinner plate ones, those are so annoying. Sluggo Plus also works on earwigs. So definitely have good experience with this, and it's something that is safe, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, I got through like so many of the questions, but I definitely didn't get them all, but hopefully this answers at least the most burning questions. I'll keep sharing more about how our dahlia field is progressing and the breeding varieties and everything that's going on. And then again, if you want more resources or information, definitely get a copy of Discovery Dahlias. It's usually like under 20 bucks on Amazon. You can also get it from the library for free. So hopefully that helped answer some of your questions, and happy spring.